We welcome you back to Talk of the Town for this Monday, May 24th. I'm Gary Stevens. We'll reopen our phone lines for open line discussion following the 10 o'clock news. But we ask that for the next 28 or 7 minutes or so, we will take a break for a CNBC update. We direct our questions and our discussion to our guest. She is Meika Weiss of Holland, and Meika's on the other side of our Zoom connection. Meika, good morning and welcome back to WHTC.
Good morning, Gary. It's great to be here. Glad
you are with us. And if you have a question for Meika, she'll be happy to answer it at 395-1450, 395-1450. Because I had to do the disclaimer, it sort of spoiled what I was going to open you up with you today. Bicycle, bicycle, bicycle. I want to ride my bicycle. It's talking about
excellent
the three-wheelers. But no, we're not going to talk about the unicyclist. I've not tried it. I don't want to try it. I don't think you've tried it either, have you?
I haven't.
But the rules of the road are certainly the same for them as it is for all. And we need to share the road. So let's put it this way. A year ago at this time, late May, we had a lot of people walking and riding the bikes because they were home. They needed to do something to get out of the house. Yes, we were staying home. We were staying safe. But we were also driving ourselves bonkers with this. Let's put it this way. It could be one of the positive things coming out of what happened over the last 15 months or so, Meika.
Yeah, I'd say so. It's remarkable to see bike shops still now. I mean, there are supply chain issues everywhere, but it's actually kind of hard to get your hands on a new bike in some ways. They've got some in stock, but so many people are deciding to ride right now. It's really exciting.
It's exciting, but unfortunately, demand also brings out the evil doers. I'm afraid that those who want to ride bicycles that are not their own. Yeah. And sometimes you get the nice locks and you think it's secure, and all of a sudden there's the lock in half. We had professionals doing that. That's not good either.
It's not. We do have some bike theft in Holland. It's not as bad as it is in some of the bigger cities where they have thief rings who just do that full time. When you're locking up your bike, you want to lock it to the frame if you can, rather than locking it to the tire. That's one of the helpful hints. If you can lock it in two places, especially if you have a more expensive bike, that's even better. But a lot of these wheels have quick release levers on them, and a really good way to come back and find only your front wheel attached to the rack is to only lock your front wheel. So lock to the frame if you can. That'll help you out a little bit.
Yeah, it does help. But then again, if they are very persistent and they got the professional jobs, doesn't matter if it's locked to the frame, it's gone. And Unfortunately, that happened to me and basically ended my bike riding days a few years ago. But more people are hitting the bikes, and more people are hitting the bikes, Meika, beyond what we would normally think is bicycle riding hours. More people are riding at night. More people are riding with the reflectors and being safe. And let's put it this way. I'm going to be honest with you. As a motorist, sometimes it's nice to see a bicyclist with the reflectors and everything, the lights on and all that. But it's still, you get a little nervous because you don't want to hit them, especially in the dark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something we really need to be aware of. We're not really taught, at least we weren't when I went through driver's ed. They're doing a few more hours of this now. We're not really taught to drive around bicycles. So, as someone who drives and rides a bike, I'm more comfortable biking around cars sometimes than I am driving around bikes because I know how powerful my vehicle is. I don't want to hurt anybody. One of the best things we can do is understand how big our cars actually are, know where the corners are. And give people a little bit more space than we think they need, especially when we're seeing these larger and larger vehicles. It really seems like it's harder for us to have kind of a feel for how big our vehicles really are, especially with the mirrors. So waiting until it's safe to pass, just like you would with any slower vehicle, a farm vehicle or anything else, waiting until it's safe to pass, and then giving at least 5 feet of distance. The law is 3 feet. That's an enforceable law. If you don't give 3 feet of distance, that's enforceable. And a lot of bikes do have cameras with us now because, these close passes are life-threatening. But if you can give 5 feet of room, that's really what we like to see. And if you're talking about higher speeds, then even more than that is better.
Now, the other thing too is the fact that it to me it's a two-way street. Meika, and we talked about this before about the fact that motorists need to be aware of bicyclists, but bicyclists also need to be aware of motorists in the sense that you can't be inconsistent with the way you're pedaling. One of my concerns when I'm going around a bicyclist, even a bike path, is I want to make sure that bicyclist stays in the bike path. Sometimes they wander off and not thinking, and all of a sudden we have a tragedy in our hands.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons for that. And one of the things that we try to do, one of the best practices is make sure that you're riding as consistently as possible. And the problem with that can be that that makes drivers less happy with us. So one of the safety tips that we have is to be riding predictably and in a straight line. It's not safe for you to be weaving in and out of parked cars, for example. But a lot of times as a driver, you really want that person on a bike to be pulling off to the side to let traffic through. So you can see how there's a little bit of a conflict in the way that we design things for how easy some of that is to do. The other thing to be aware of is that sometimes the path might look clear from the outside, but there might be debris, there might be gravel, there might be potholes, a lot of things like that that make it necessary for the person on the bike to move out of the bike lane or in the door zone. Some of our bike lanes are built so that an opening door from a parked car would strike the bicyclist. And so that has us moving further to the left side of a bike lane as well. And yeah, especially if you can get mirrors on your bike, be careful on the bike to check for traffic before you move out into the vehicular travel lane. And it's just one more reason to make sure that you're giving adequate space, because the other piece of this is that we don't have educational schemes for bicyclists. And so this is just kind of we learn as we go. There's not a formal training program. Some places have that, we don't, and it's just something that we have to kind of work through.
And part of that, and by the way, if you have a question for Meika Weiss from Pedal Holland about bicycling and bicyclists, she'll be happy to answer it at 616-395-1450, 616-395-1450. Part of, I think, the fact that maybe why we don't have a lot of training is for the most part, most of us learn how to bike when we are kids. It's mom and dad teaching us with the training wheels, and then away you go. And until you get your first car, you only can go on a bike. That's all you can do. And when we get a little older, we still are thinking like a kid instead of, thinking like a motorist. And sometimes you have to think like a motorist as a bicyclist, as an older bicyclist, than thinking as a kid when you are a younger bicyclist.
Yeah, it's a great freedom that it gives to our kids when they're able to ride their bikes around. But it's true, some of that formal education, it would be helpful to us, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it certainly would. 616-395-1450, 395-1450. Good morning. You're on the line with Meika Weiss of Pedal Holland.
Hi. Say, we live out in the country, and we have these bicyclists that come through with these races or whatever you want to call them. And, we have hills, and on the country roads, the speed limit is 55 unless it's posted otherwise. And it's sometimes you come over a hill and whoo, there's a bunch of them. And if they wear flags on the back that stick up would be somewhat helpful. Plus, also, I grew up and we were always taught single file is safe. Anything other than that is not safe. And they're always taking up the whole lane, which to me, in the country, you would think that they'd be a little bit more careful and realize that, people are not expecting them. So I don't know if you can address it. I'm going to hang up and listen, but it's just frightening to me. I don't want anyone to get hurt.
I don't blame you at all. And thank you very much for the call. And Meika, that leads to the point, and we'll see it more as we get into the warmer months, where we have bike groups have Saturday rides and Sunday rides, weekend tours, maybe a bicycle trip up to Newaygo or something like that. Some short thing. We are going to see groups going and riding together.
Yeah, and as drivers, it can be surprising, especially like the caller was talking about in hilly areas and areas where a lot of curves. The roads are designed typically to the speed limit where you have enough space to react. That's at least the idea. That's the concept when they design curves and whatnot, so that you have space to react. And that's where our responsibility as motorists really comes in, to be careful, not to endanger people. And I understand that, because I've certainly had that happen as well. One of the things we tend to think that riding single file is safer. Michigan law allows for riding two abreast. And when you're talking about riding in a big group, it actually tends to be safer to be taking up a little bit more space on the road, because what tends to happen when you're riding single file is some drivers just don't have the patience, aren't willing to practice that patience to wait and to pass. When you're going single file, you're a much longer line to pass, so it makes it difficult for people to get past you, and they're more likely to kind of squeeze you off the road, and squeeze you even just onto the shoulder. We don't have large shoulders on a lot of our roads, especially out in the country. There's not a lot of space there. And the edges of the roads are what tends to degrade first. So it makes it more dangerous to go out to that side as well. So by riding two abreast, even though it's a little bit disconcerting, it allows the train of bikes, so to speak, to be a little bit shorter, because you're two abreast instead of stretched one abreast. And then it really forces the motorist to wait until there's actually space to pass. And I know that can be frustrating sometimes. And it's just all part of sharing our public space. And we all just kind of have to do our best with that. We have the same thing when we talk about farm implements, and there's a lot of slow moving traffic out there. I grew up in an area with a lot of Amish buggies. That was always something that was kind of dangerous. And that's just kind of how our system is designed, unfortunately. So we just have to kind of do our best to be considerate and bear with each other the best we can.
Thank you very much for the call, caller. If you have a question for Meika Weiss of Pedal Holland, she'll be happy to answer it at 616-395-1450, 616-395-1450. We've been talking about bicycling safety, not only as a motorist with the bicyclist, but the bicyclist with the motorist as well. I've noticed, as we are seeing improvements with our trunk roads, be it the M40 situation or the Blue Star Highway or some of the others, where when they do make the improvements, it's wider. And so there's a little bit more room for the bicyclist to be on the shoulder. It's not like the pavement ends at the white line and all of a sudden it's gravel. So we are seeing that a little bit more and more with the trunk roads, but it's going to take some time for some of the rural roads to be able to incorporate that. And so, pack your patience as well as, as well as anything as you are motoring about. A couple of other safety notes, and then I want to talk a little bit about how people can get involved with Pedal Holland as well, Meika. As we get along into the summer months especially, what's the best thing to do in terms of staying, making sure you're secure with your bike, especially if you are going to drive to a location, hop on the bike, ride around, and take your bike back in your car. Sometimes, you just throw the bike in the back of the SUV and there you go. But to be honest with you, I think a bike carrier might be a little bit safer for everyone involved.
Yeah, bike carrier might be great. Honestly, I don't have one, and I usually, my bike is really big. It doesn't actually fit on any kind of rack. So I kind of toss my daughter's bike in the back of the SUV when I want to take it somewhere. So I'm not going to be able to give the great tips for how to transport in that way, because I just kind of go with things that way.
Oh, but there are some people who would take off the front wheel.
Yes.
And it's
yeah. So you do have to be careful with that. And you can also do things to make it easier to use your bike closer to home. And of course, that depends on where you live. But, adding things like fenders to your bike, and a rear rack, a basket, some lights, things like that, they really make it possible to do a lot more with your bike than you maybe thought that you could before. So sometimes you can get that fun ride in without having to try to figure out how to move it in your car.
As a bicyclist yourself, do you encounter people who have vanity issues? I don't want to put a fender on my bike or a basket. It's going to make me look like a weenie. There are some people who have vanity issues in that regard.
I'm sure that there are. I don't hear a lot of that, but I think I pull up on I have a cargo bike, which is an extra long bike with really big bags in the back. So I think that they probably know they're not going to get a receptive audience with me with that one.
Yeah.
But we all bike how we want to bike. If somebody doesn't want to ride like that and just wants to go for these long, fast rides, more power to them. We all ride how we want to ride.
Yeah. I had a Trex before it was taken from me, but before that, I had one of those English touring bikes. Somebody brought it over from Britain, and a friend of ours refurbished it, and I used it for about 20 years or so until it basically rusted out. But still, it had the fenders and all that, but still, it was sturdy, and that was the important thing. I didn't want to have the the weird handlebars and all that. I don't mind, as long as I don't have to, the old. I think my brother still has it in the garage at home. My old bike that I had a blue tire in front and had a banana seat in the back.
Oh, nice. I
with
think
a little
we
wheelie
peaked then.
with a little wheelie, wheelie handlebar in the back. So
Those were the best.
but that was vintage 1970s. We have brought this subject up before. I'm going to revisit it again because during the break I was handed a slip. A caller who did not want to go on the air had a question for you, and it dealt with double standards. I'm going to quote exactly what Patty told me. She didn't ask the question, but the caller transcribed, and this is from her transcription. Quote, why is it that bicyclists don't stop at stop signs or stoplights if there isn't any traffic? The bicyclists want to have the same laws as the motorists, yet that law isn't obeyed by the bicyclist. Yet if a bicyclist running a stop sign or a stoplight gets hit, the motorist gets the ticket. Your thoughts about, and I say end quote, on that, I would say more than anything else, concern a caller had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something we hear pretty often. And it's an interesting thing to look at because there have been studies done at this point that show that people are people regardless of what vehicle we choose. So when you look at vehicles going through stop signs, whether it's a bicycle or a car, I can see a couple stop signs from my front porch, from my kitchen table, and no one stops at stop signs. It's not something that I would defend or that I would say is a positive thing, but coming to a full stop as a stop sign isn't something that I tend to see. We would like to encourage people, of course, to stop at stop signs. As a bicyclist, sometimes you're in a more vulnerable position. Well, always you're in a more vulnerable position. We're not surrounded by this reinforced metal box with safety standards. And as a result, sometimes when we stop at a stop sign, we get rear-ended. It takes more energy for us to stop fully. And we don't have the reductions in visibility that you have when you're inside a car. So those big A-pillars that are in front of you that help hold up your roof and protect you in rollovers, we don't have that. We're completely open to what's going on around us. And so for those reasons, most people on bikes aren't going to come to a complete stop at a stop sign, which isn't any different than a vehicle does. Now, I'm not saying that that's something positive that we should be trying to do more of in our community. Stopping at stop signs is a positive thing that we should all be doing. But that tends to be what's behind that behavior. Now, that is a different thing than something that I think we do also see sometimes, which is that there are people on bikes who will just fly through any stop sign, any light, really not slowing down, go through a four-way when there are other people waiting, things like that. I mean, that's not defensible behavior. That's not something that we want to be in favor of. Obviously, we need to be doing better with that. But that's the same thing that you can say about people who are in a car as well. And I would also say that typically from my experience, and that might differ from other people's experience, but just from my experience with our local police departments, typically if a bicyclist flies through a stop sign, flies through a light, crosses against the light, the motorist is not ticketed. In fact, we see a much lower level of ticketing of motorists for what is sometimes irresponsible behavior and dangerous behavior on their behalf when interacting with bikes than we would prefer to see. So I understand the frustration. There are some reasons behind it. And ultimately, human behavior isn't all that different depending on what mode of transportation we're using.
Yeah, human behavior, that definitely is something that needs to be kept in mind. Meika Weiss, how can people get involved with Pedal Holland?
Well, you can do a couple different things. You can go to our website, pedalholland.org. We have a couple of forms that you can fill out if you want to get involved in volunteering and things like that. Most of what we do is advocacy. We have bike counts that we do to try to collect data on who's actually using our roads. We don't have a lot of data on that. Most of the data that's collected is on vehicles. And we have very, very little on how people are getting around when they're not in a vehicle. And that's something that's come to our attention recently, that there are census tracts in our area with 15% of people who don't have a car in their household. So understanding that is important. And so we try to do some of that background work. You can also get information about where you can go to figure out what rides are happening locally. We have links to all of our local bike shops. We have links to places you can report potholes and things like that. And then if you also have questions or things that you wanted to talk to us about more specifically, you can always email us at pedalholland@pedalholland.org.
And of course, as the weather becomes nice and warm, more and more people will be out on the bikes. We'll probably, as we are getting some of the COVID-19 restrictions being relaxed, I think we will start seeing the road rallies return. I know some are just for fun. Others are for worthwhile causes. I know the MS Society had bike rallies on an annual basis, which was very popular and probably will return, if not this year, certainly next year. Certainly a lot of safety things to keep in mind. But again, the key is sharing the road. For us motorists, shared with the bikers, and for the bicyclists, and I'm going to say the cyclists, not the bikers, because bikers were thinking motorcyclists. No. For the cyclists, also being aware of the road, and more than anything else, Meika, pedal with common sense. Sometimes you may have to, not follow the rules of the road. You might have to take a step back as a bicyclist. Discretion, the better part of valor. That's the point I'm trying to make as well.
Yeah. Always be very careful. It's such a dangerous environment sometimes. So yeah, for all of us to be mindful of our surroundings and to remember that the person on the other side of that windshield or over those handlebars is a person too.
Indeed. Meika Weiss from Pedal Holland. Again, the website is pedalholland.org. We'll put a link to that website when we put the podcast of our conversation with Meika on our webpage at WHTC.com, and we'll do that in a few moments. Meika Weiss, thank you very much for joining us today on Talk of the Town, and we look forward to chatting with you again about bike safety and some other bicycling activities coming up later on this summer. Thank you, Meika.
Yeah, thank you, Gary.
And that is Meika Weiss on 99.7 and 1450 WHTC.